Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I saw a discussion that was prompted by a coach on social media the other day, and they were talking about training volume, and they were asking HIIT advocates out there, because there's a wide diversity of people who network together, of their thoughts on what happens when people who train with high volume, will they detrain if they reduce their volume, and how low can they get away with dropping their volume before they detrain? So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, do a little bit of crafting, and let's talk about that, because that's really an interesting topic, because I get asked a lot about that also. I always get guys who say things like, hey, you know, if I've been doing 12 sets a week for this body part and 15 sets a week for this body part, if I cut my volume in half, will I keep my gains? Will I lose muscle? And it's weird that these people are asking the same sort of things, and these are people who are discussing this, who coach powerlifters, coach bodybuilders, coach different types of people. And you know what, guys, it's really funny when people talk about this, because I want people to step back and think about this for a minute. Arguably, high volume training in many cases might actually be the key to producing maximal muscle growth. It isn't necessary to produce good or even great muscle growth, but it might be necessary for many individuals to produce maximum muscle growth. And so you might actually need that 12 sets for your biceps per week, or 18 sets, or whatever it is that you happen to need. But you need to understand that's your cumulative workload. Your rows and your chin-ups count towards your biceps too, not just your curls. Same thing for your hamstrings or whatever it is. Guys are like, well, I'm doing 12 sets for my hamstrings. Well, you need to understand that includes your deadlifts. All right, that includes all those big compounds that hit them as well. People forget that when they start talking about direct work, they're confusing their compound work and their isolation work. But all of that counts together. But you know what? I'm going to ask you guys a very, very simple question. If you are seeing progression, or you're able to maintain the same strength on the bar, even if you're doing fewer sets, why would you lose muscle mass? I want people to stop and think about that for a minute. If you are able to do weighted chin-ups with 35 pounds for 6 reps from a dead hang, and you've been doing 2 sets of that, plus you've been doing a bunch of curls, like 10 sets of curls a week of a couple different exercises, if you were to still come in and do 1 set of 6 reps with 35 pounds on the chin-up, which is about all you're capable of doing, and let's say for your straight bar curls with a barbell, you've been able to do sets of 10 with 85 pounds on it, and you come in and you do a set of 10 with 85 pounds on it, even though you've been able to normally doing 3 or 4 sets of that, plus another isolation movement, why would your biceps get smaller? Why would they get smaller? How would they get smaller? You're still stimulating them with workloads on sets that are near your maximum mobility. All right? Your body only loses muscle when it sees a survival reason to drop it. Meaning you drop calories so low that your body realizes it needs to drop muscle mass to keep you alive, to slow your metabolism down, starvation. All right? That's a viable reason. When you quit training a muscle completely, when you're not subjecting it to enough work that it needs to hold on to it, yeah, your body will over time lose muscle mass, because it knows it doesn't necessarily need it. Extra muscle is just extra energy burned, extra calories. It could cause you to starve during the next famine. But if you're getting adequate nutrition, adequate rest, and you are still stimulating the same sort of work sets that you were before, why would you lose muscle mass? You wouldn't. People don't. And here's the fact of the matter. We can laugh about HIIT style training all we want. People doing 1 or 2 work sets to failure per week, and that's it. It's not the most efficient. And anyone who looks at it knows that is not the best way to gain muscle. It's not the best way to gain strength. Everyone universally agrees on that who really studies the exercise science. But here's the question. Do people who do that type of training, do they still make gains? Yeah, they still make gains. Of course they do. They make gains. They get bigger. We could argue they could get bigger doing something else a little bit faster. And that's a reasonable argument. But do they make gains? Of course they do. Why? Because of progressive overload. Progressive overload is the primary factor in gaining size and strength. It's the primary factor. All the other stuff is about fine-tuning it. All right, if progressive overload is there, you're going to gain muscle mass. You're going to gain strength. It's unavoidable as long as the progression is there. Now, the progression will stop if you're not getting enough food or sleep. But people come in and they do minimalist training, of Satan minimalist training that I would consider inadequate many times, yet they still make progress. So if you have a training system that someone is able to make progress with, being used, even if it's inefficient and not the best and it's slow, why would they lose muscle mass doing it? They won't. They'll be able to make gains. They're just going to be slower gains. Factor people need to consider there. Factor people need to consider there. In fact, it's absolutely possible to make gains coming into the gym and lifting weights once a week. Would I recommend it? No. Is it ideal? No. But it can be done. But people have these ideas that because they used a certain method to gain their muscle mass, that anything less than that method isn't going to allow them to keep it. But that's not true. Because, you know, the truth is, a lot of guys do a lot of extra silly fluff. They do a lot of stuff they don't need. A lot of people train with more volume than they really need to get results. And the only reason they get away with the volume they do is because they do a bunch of fluff and pump, and they're not actually training that hard with it. That's why they get away from the volume and recover with the volume. But here's the other thing. I mean, there have been cases to where when people reduce their workloads, they gain muscle mass. Because here's the truth of the matter. You have a maximum recoverable volume that you could subject your body to. All right? This stuff works both ways. Yeah, there's a minimum volume to induce growth, but there's also maximum volumes that when you exceed, your muscle gains will slow down or even halt, and in some cases regress. That's not necessarily the same thing as overtraining until you reach a chronic state of it. But if you were to train with a volume that is higher than your body recovers from, and you keep training with a volume that you're not recovering from, and you're never recovered enough to really grow adequately from session to session, or you think you're going to gain muscle mass? And you'll notice that particularly if your lifts aren't going up. If none of your lifts are going up and all you're doing is adding volume, but you're not even getting stronger on the main lifts, that's the first giveaway that something's wrong with balancing your recovery with your training volume. So a lot of people, it's quite the opposite. Some people train with so much volume that they're spending more time recovering than they are growing, unfortunately. Are they still oftentimes gaining some muscle? Yeah, they're still gaining muscle because they're training hard enough to stimulate it. And they're getting enough food and sleep. They're gaining some muscle, but sometimes when they back it down a notch, they start gaining more. Why? Because they've been exceeding their maximum recoverable volume. And again, usually you can tell that's happening when, you know, you're doing 6 different exercises for a body part and 20 sets a week for it, but the big lifts, the main ones involved with those body parts, aren't getting stronger. You're not improving at those. That's a dead giveaway. You're probably exceeding your maximum recoverable volume. And when you back everything down, you start improving on those and you gain muscle. And people need to understand that most of your muscle mass comes from your core lifts, your big basic exercises, and your early work sets in each week or each workout. All right, once you start doing high sets in a workout, the later sets are only giving you a small amount of your growth. They're still potentially adding growth because remember, tonnage matters, workload matters, volume matters. I don't want people to think that I'm saying it doesn't, because it does. But it is a point of diminished returns. Every additional set that you are doing is giving you less gains than the set before it, but it is cutting further into your recovery. So for many people, even reducing their volume will speed up gains. Now, in some cases, you can reduce it so low that gains reduce also. But the fact of the matter is, reducing volume, even if you used high volume training to build all of your size, when you reduce volume and go to more minimalist training, yeah, you might gain slower. Some people might gain faster. Depends on their genetics, depends on if they were exceeding their maximum recoverable volume or not on their high volume training. Some people will make faster gains. A lot of people are going to get slower gains, but they're not going to regress because they're going back to basic exercises. And if they're coming in and doing the basics, and if they start progressing on them, they're going to gain muscle. They're not going to lose it. So this whole idea is circulating out there that if you reduce your training volume that you're going to lose muscle mass, or this fear of losing muscle mass, is just absurd. Because trust me, if you're coming in and just doing at least the basics, and you're working with the same sort of at least workload density, might not be the same total tonnage move, might not be the same total volume move, but at least if your workload density, the amount of work you're doing per unit of time, stays pretty high. And that can be done with only one work set once a week. Again, not ideal. I wouldn't recommend it. But you're not going to lose muscle if you're doing that unless you're coming in and just really goofing off on that one set. So just a point people need to consider when these topics come up. People are so worried about regressing when they back off a little bit. And the fact of the matter is there's no reality to that. Because lifting weights and progressive overload stimulate muscle growth. All right. So if you come in and you reduce your volume way down, but you can actually make progress on the few sets and lifts you are doing, you're still going to continue to make gains. In some cases, most cases, it'll probably be less gains than you made on the high volume training, but for some people, it will actually be more gains. It's just a matter of how well they were recovering to what they were doing before and what sort of training they were doing. But again, you're not going to lose muscle if you're still coming in and training hard, even if you cut way back to a fifth of what you were previously doing. You're still going to be able to make gains. You're still definitely going to be able to hold on to what you have. So it's kind of an interesting argument that people get into, and it's a concern that people have that really isn't valid, and I think it's a concern that oftentimes stems back to exercise addiction. It's not so much about their gains, it's the fact that it's their exercise addiction telling them, if I reduce my training volume at all, I'm going to get smaller. Again, that's your exercise addiction speaking, that's not reality. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.